From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new Sox Machine Podcast episode. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday, March 6th, 2023, as we bring you a new episode. Today, we continue our 2023 White Sox position previews, looking at first and third base. Is Andrew Vaughn ready to take the torch from Jose Abreu this year? Can Yoan Moncada bounce back after his dismal offensive season in 2022? And what will the White Sox do with Gavin and Jake Burger? We'll try to answer those questions, play a little over-under as well later in the show. Plus, Jose Abreu spoke about him leaving the White Sox, which those comments certainly caught a lot of attention. And joining me is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis. And Jim, before we get into those topics, there's just a couple of news items regarding the Chicago White Sox as Major League Baseball on Sunday released a statement concerning their investigation of starting pitcher Mike Clevinger. And the commissioner's office wrote, quote, "The Office of the Commissioner of Baseball has completed its investigation into allegations against Chicago White Sox pitcher Mike Clevinger. The comprehensive investigation included interviews of more than 15 individuals, in addition to Mr. Clevinger and the complaint, as well as a review of available documents such as thousands of electronic communication records. The Office of the Commissioner has closed this investigation, and bearing the receipt of any new information or evidence, the Office of the Commissioner will not be imposing discipline on Mr. Clevinger in connection with these allegations. As a part of his path forward, Mr. Clevinger has voluntarily agreed to submit to evaluations by the Joint Treatment Boards under the collectively bargained policies and to comply with any of the board's recommendations. Major League Baseball will continue to make support services available to Mr. Clevinger, his family, and other individuals involved in the allegations." And Mike Clevinger did pitch for the White Sox today. He was part of the B squad game against Los Angeles Dodgers. That was not televised. He struck out 3 and 2 innings on 43 pitches, and he allowed a home run and 2 runs in total. And his first Cactus League start that could be televised is either going to be against the Chicago Cubs on Friday, March 10th, or against the San Diego Padres, his former team, on Saturday, March 11th.
Yeah, it's, the longer the investigation went on, and given that it was a very long investigation, dating back to last summer, I kind of had the feeling of like when watching a replay of a close call trying to be overturned, they look at it and look at it and look at it, and you think the longer they look at it, the just harder it is to come up with a decisive action against the play. And it kind of came to the same... That came to mind here watching, this investigation like unfold and last into spring training, and just, you would think if they had something, they would have, dropped their hammer on him. But for now, it's just kind of this, unclear resolution. It's clear enough in the sense that there is no disciplinary action. Unclear in the sense that, he has volunteered for treatment if treatment is recommended. So on the spectrum of like completely cleared and exonerated to like a case where just Major League Baseball looked at it and just saw a complete mess on both sides and just could not determine, who is the more reliable narrator, and said like, there's no criminal charges. We can't really go forward with it. Hard to say. So, just a case where it's messy. It's a hell of a way to start a White Sox career. And it's, an unnecessarily divisive signing, I think, similar to the Tony La Russa thing, just starting on a wrong foot. And, you just hope that everybody gets through the year with no other embarrassment, and everybody's able to turn the page on it.
Don't suck. That's my advice. Don't suck. Because if you suck, you are definitely going to hear it very loud. In other news for the White Sox, on the roster side, following the spring training game against the Los Angeles Dodgers, which the White Sox lost 8-4, Lucas Giolito did make that start. Fastball velocity was about 92 to 93 miles per hour. The changeup looked good, but he got beat on the fastball. Mookie Betts hit a home run. Giolito also allowed an RBI triple as well off of the fastball, but the velocity was 92, 93 at his first start. We'll see what happens in his following starts during spring training. But the White Sox optioned Jonathan Stever to Charlotte, And we talked about Stever the last podcast episode in my rant about the lack of StatCast data. Him throwing 91-92 is a concern, so not a big surprise that Stever has been optioned to Charlotte already. And the White Sox have reassigned Sean Burke, Matt Thompson, Luis Mieses, Colson Montgomery, and Evan Skog to the minor league camp. We'll probably see these guys later towards the end of spring training. So this is probably not the last time we see all these guys play in spring training games, but with these reassignments, the White Sox currently have 60 players in spring training camp right now.
Yeah, I think Burke was really the only surprise, and more because he seemed to fare okay, given that he could factor into the pitching depth. Should disaster strike, he might be towards the front of the line for filling in starts. He figured they might want to see one or two more turns to see what he has to work on. But otherwise, it seemed like pretty chalk in terms of the first one's down.
Well, we're going to be seeing Dylan Cease pretty soon, and we should be seeing Michael Kopech. We're getting to the point in spring training where the page turns, where it's a bunch of guys early that we don't even know if they're going to pitch at all in the major leagues to, all right, now we're getting serious. Now it's time to see how Giolito throws at his second turn and where his velocity is, and gauging if everyone is healthy enough to at least try to attempt going 75 pitches in their first start, either against the Houston Astros or the San Francisco Giants to start the season. So we're inching closer to there. But yeah, Sean Burke, as you mentioned, the curveball looked good, even though it's Arizona and breaking pitches don't fare too well down in Arizona. So far, so good, I think, from Sean Burke. And we even got a chance to see Colson Montgomery. And like I mentioned, we'll probably see these guys later on, but the guys that were not going to be factors in making the team have already been reassigned. All right, so those are the news items for the Chicago White Sox. Let's talk about Jose Abreu. So Steve Greenberg of the Chicago Sun-Times, he wrote an article about Jose Abreu. He's got one coming out also in the Sun-Times about Wilson Contreras leaving the Chicago Cubs for the St. Louis Cardinals. So very similar stories here. Well-beloved players, big personalities, voices that media gravitated to in the clubhouse for years for the respective teams, and both of them have left Chicago. And when it comes to Jose Abreu, he was obviously asked about what happened in his departure from the White Sox and signing with the Houston Astros and his thoughts about the 2022 season. And there are two quotes to zero in on. And the first quote, Jose Abreu said, quote, "Sometimes when you're at a place where maybe you're not being respected to the point where you think you should be, you just have to go somewhere else," end quote. Not off to a great start. And then talking about the White Sox clubhouse, Abreu said, "I think sometimes talking about the past can bring a lot of animosity. But I think the best way I could put it is that just that we weren't a real family. And I'm hoping maybe the White Sox can get to a situation where a lot of the guys there that do deserve to be in a good situation, they could have it there and be able to win. But I don't really have too much more to say about that." And then he followed that up with on the difference between the White Sox and Astros, in that he noticed immediately the Astros have a family atmosphere, and he can understand why the Astros have been so good in recent years. And he has not been with the Astros for very long. So they have made a quick, very impressive first impression on Jose Abreu, Jim, the Houston Astros. All right, Jim, you wrote a column about this on Saturday, and I think a lot of attention when Abreu made these comments, and they were posted in the Sun-Times, and even I had a Twitter space as well on Friday when they were released. The word disrespected that he brings up, any clue in why he feels disrespected by the White Sox?
I would say, without knowing the inner workings of negotiations between the White Sox and Abreu, like the tone had shifted before the season. So you can't even necessarily say that it was entirely due to the way the White Sox unraveled in 2022 and the way that Tony La Russa, and his administration just had really poor communication, and all the players who, played injured, and all the strange calls, and on and on and on. Like, even before the season, like, he was approaching it with a different tenor than the last time he was about to reach free agency, where he's going to say, he's going to resign himself no matter what. Like, so I assume, one case he had good conversations about what's possible after the season. So he's very enthusiastic about it. And then the next time around, the White Sox were leaning towards Andrew Vaughn. They still had to see what like Eloy Jimenez would, look like and where he would fit. And so, they probably looked at the depth chart and said like, there are better uses of $17 million for this team, and perhaps that's a case where, somebody who gave the White Sox as much as Jose Abreu gave them, I could see it being a case where like, it's a business decision that hurts. And it does feel like being disrespected, especially when Andrew Vaughn really hasn't accomplished anything yet. When, Jimenez has as many plate appearances over the last 2 years or fewer plate appearances over the last 2 years that Abreu had in 2022 alone. Like, he's been the one showing up to the post every day and producing and playing through pain and everything. And the White Sox failed him. And so I can see it being a case where like they failed him and they didn't offer him, a worthwhile deal during or after. So like, I can't imagine being a little bit hurt, but then when you read his comments about like where the White Sox went wrong and what he sees in the Astros already, you do think a little bit, why am I mad? Once you see how good another team has it, maybe think like, oh, maybe I should have looked around sooner versus, re-signing myself, quote unquote. So that's kind of what I thought. Maybe, as he goes into the year, especially if he produces. And one of the other fascinating things I saw in the story was that the Astros are working on him getting the ball off the ground in situations where there might be a double play, which, we've talked about plenty of times. And, I'm sure the White Sox talked about it. I don't know if the White Sox had a plan of, delivering information, whether about, pitches he's facing or about swing mechanics that combined for him to hit in so many double plays and just couldn't solve it. But it seems like the Astros have that front of mind. Whether it make a difference, I don't know. But now I'm, I was interested already in how Abreu is going to fare. Now I'm going to be even more interested to see if like there was a tweak that gets him back to that 25, 30 home run power versus the 15 homer power that, I think made him expendable. Because I think if he had another 30-100 season, you could see a clamoring for the White Sox to re-sign Abreu. And even the White Sox might have felt more compelled to sign Abreu. But when he topped out at 15 homers last year, that could be the start of like a gentle decline. And you have to hit homers at guaranteed rate field. And he didn't quite hit them enough. So, it's going to be fun watching him, as much as it's going to be, not fun to watch him in Houston's Astros uniform specifically. It's going to be fun, like as a baseball fan, wanting to know how different teams might alter the trajectory of a player's career or, reverse a decline, just to see how it happens. Now, I'm curious, like, I guess I'm and fascinated by like, looking at his data every so often to see like what's going on, whether he's changed or whether like the Astros just, can't reverse time.
So my concerns when Jose Abreu made these comments, one, the White Sox need to do a better job as a franchise breaking up with players. With other organizations, over 20 years, they've had many different GMs and many different changes in front office personnel that you can't make this same type of argument, but you can with the White Sox because they've been together for 20 plus seasons. Frank Thomas, Ozzie Guillen, Chris Sale, Jose Abreu. Like, why do some of the most important players and personalities and personnel that have been part of the White Sox, why do they feel disrespected by the organization? Like, that's something internally they need to kind of look at themselves and see if they could avoid. Because, and as I mentioned, I hosted a Twitter space on Friday, and one of our friends, Colin, from England across the pond, I think he made a really good point. And his point was, if the White Sox make it to the postseason 2023, Jose Abreu's words carry no weight. If the White Sox don't make the playoffs in 2023, his words carry a lot of weight of what was going on in the clubhouse and what still might be going on in the clubhouse. Because my chief concern is Jose Abreu is not on an island when it comes to feeling this way about the Chicago White Sox. And if he's not the only one that feels this way about the organization and how things have been ran, there are current players that are going to be becoming free agents very soon. After this season, it's Lucas Giolito and Yasmani Grandal, and the White Sox can get out of the contracts of Lance Lynn and Liam Hendricks for $1 million. And then the following year, you start getting to the club options of Eloy Jimenez and Yoan Moncada. And then after the 2024 season, suddenly Dylan Cease and Michael Kopech are going to be approaching free agency. And if your players in the current clubhouse are not particularly happy with how things are ran, or they are seeing that the grass is greener elsewhere in the major leagues, because players do talk, that is not going to help the Chicago White Sox if players like Jose Abreu, one of the most respected players in all of Major League Baseball, everyone in Major League Baseball loves Abreu and admires his work ethic and the way he carries himself on the field. If Jose Abreu feels disrespected by your free agency, I cannot imagine that helps you in any conversation with future players when it comes to free agency. So if there's anything that you need to nip in the bud now to clear any bad air, this would be one of those times to help you out in the near future. But again, if they win, then everything's hunky-dory as long as you continue to win. If you don't win, then Jose Abreu may not be the only one bringing these points up.
Well, then you get to the point where, Rick Hahn should be fired for like the third or fourth time.
Yeah.
It all comes back to that, and Kenny Williams too, just the entire hierarchy the White Sox have, should be overhauled thoroughly. But I think the one counter I would have to that is that, I think part of the reason why Abreu might be stung, or why the White Sox have a hard time breaking up with players, or why, people get sore. Like, I remember the same things, or not same things, but like same discontent being sounded about Jeff Luhnow when he was, overseeing the Astros, and saying like, what an impersonal brand of McKinsey style management he brings to the team. And I just feel like a number, and I feel completely interchangeable. And, they had George Springer didn't sound happy with the way his extension talks went and the final years of his arbitration went. When they got rid of Bo Porter, he was sore about it. Some other guys, felt really frustrated about the way the Astros went about their business, but they won. They had standards. They had, a certain way of doing things. Eventually, the success won out. And with the White Sox, they're not successful, and they don't really change much. So I think anytime a player is changed, it feels like punishment. Like, I'm thinking like Dallas Keuchel last year when they DFA'd him. You think, okay, the status quo is unacceptable. Heads are starting to roll. And then like his head was the only one that rolled. And, nobody else changed. No managers got fired. The hitting coach stayed the entire time. Injured players played. There wasn't really any kind of evidence that anything else was unsatisfactory with the way they're going, aside from the win and loss record. And so, Keuchel can be a little bit sore, and maybe, there were suspicions that he was the one leaking to reporters about just the cliques in the clubhouse. And, perhaps that's true with the way, maybe Abreu has verified that a little bit by saying that they weren't a family. But, just it's a case where he sounded sore about it. But after a while, when he realized like he's the only starter who's faced consequences, really, you can understand why that he might take it a little bit more personally than like, oh, they overhauled 4 spots and rookies are getting a shot because they're showing some life, and they're just, trying to jettison all the dead weight in hopes of, getting this thing back above, the surface line. So that's why I think, these instances of a White Sox player being divorced with might be a little bit more emotionally jarring than other teams' ordinary, difficult business decisions. And I think we heard a little bit about that with Dave Dombrowski too, like as he was being celebrated when the Phillies made the World Series, and just talking about like how he's been able to be successful in so many places. And they talk about like the personal touch he brings. And, he's a guy who's probably had to make decisions like that, but between being successful and probably having, or I shouldn't say probably having, but having good people skills, the combination of both winning and being able to deliver bad news with humanity probably makes it a case where like they get over it, or they can't, if they're the ones railing about it after a week or so and not letting the wound heal, that's probably more their fault than anything he's doing.
But the White Sox, as you mentioned, are not successful.
Yes.
They also don't sign premium free agents. So there's two reasons for that. One, Jerry Reinsdorf's appetite, but they have allegedly made more than $100 million contract offers to players, and they haven't accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have a feeling there's this reputation in Major League Baseball about the Chicago White Sox that spoke about internally that's maybe not as well known externally out in the public, or people don't want to make mention of it because it could change immediately depending on how much cash you would have to throw at someone. Again, if the White Sox win this year, then Jose Abreu's words don't carry a lot of weight because the clubhouse was able to move on from him. Pedro Grifol in the short term got these guys to believe, and they became a family with a new guy running things.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't win, you're going to see more players leaving the White Sox that are part of this contention core, and we may continue to get more messages like Jose Abreu has mentioned in future years. Like, this could be something that lingers. And I don't think this is something you want to linger. It's not good baseball ops business. And
it gets to the, Gar Forman, John Paxson thing with Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams, where they just look like losers.
Yeah.
And everybody's kind of, whether directly or indirectly with their actions by not signing, by this word of mouth getting around, is like they're losers. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. So it's high stakes for them, even if they don't really have, even if they might not face consequences for a losing season, and you have to assume that they're going to be around until they don't want to be around. It is a big year for them, just I think reputationally, because they can't rebuild again. I mean, they can rebuild again,
right?
But nobody's going to trust the rebuild. Nobody's going to have the same faith that the last rebuild had, where fumigate the whole thing. We're going to have to just put the tent over it, and you're going to have to live in a hotel for 2 months while we get rid of the smell, and eventually you're going to build this thing back up. That's how the last rebuild was greeted. But if the same guys are doing another kind of tear down or retrenching, retooling of any sort, the response to me, why are we going to believe this one? You had the last one beautifully set up and you couldn't do it. So it is a big year for them. I think just whatever is left of their reputation is going to be decided by what happens this year, I think.
My second piece of advice of this show, win, White Sox clubhouse. In the short term, just win, baby. You're going to need it. Let's not think about what's going to be coming after this season. Before we head to break, a bit of sad news here. Dave Wills, the radio voice of the Tampa Bay Rays, passed away on Sunday at the age of 58. He had been the voice of the Tampa Bay Rays since the 2005 season, but Wills had a very strong Chicago connection. He was the Chicago White Sox pre- and post-game host from 1997 to 2004. He considered himself a diehard White Sox fan who grew up in Oak Lawn, and he went to Elmhurst College. He was also involved in the UIC baseball program, at one time coaching the baseball team, but then becoming the voice of the baseball program on the radio. And you can just see the outpour on social media, especially those from Chicago and across Major League Baseball, on the sudden loss of Dave Wills. And I know that the Tampa Bay Rays community is quite sad. And again, Wills was a diehard Chicago White Sox fan and had strong Chicago connections. You can see a lot of people that have been in the industry, especially in Chicago radio, are heartbroken with the news. Jim, you mentioned on Twitter, in an alternate timeline, Wills could have replaced John Rooney to be the radio voice of the Chicago White Sox.
Yeah, that's what I remember of that sequence of the White Sox radio job, is that in 2004 or after the 2004 season, before the 2005 season, Wills left for Tampa Bay. And I remember having listened to a lot of White Sox radio in those years, just enjoying the work he did on the pregame, postgame show, feeling like, wow, this guy is good. We're lucky to have him. We're lucky that he keeps hanging around year after year. It's just, it's a stacked bench, basically. When he's the backup guy, when he's the guy leading into John Rooney and Ed Farmer, and then John Rooney and Ed Farmer going back to Dave Wills, it's that feels like 4 hours of just airtime being in good hands. And when he got the job at the Rays, you weren't surprised, because he was talented. Everybody had great things to say about him. And the way, the Rays talked about him. Rays fans talked about him, occasionally checking in on his broadcast when I was on a drive, just, flipping through Sirius XM, going through the ball game, seeing, if there's anything interesting in here, like a Dave Wills broadcast. I'm like, oh, glad to hear he's doing well. Like, that's kind of how I felt, like, checking in with an old friend, or just like, or maybe like an acquaintance where like you're Facebook friends with them and you just like, they post some good news and you say, congratulations. Like that kind of, bond you had with him is like knowing him kinda, and that tie fading a little bit, but being happy when you heard his voice and hearing him do well. But then like John Rooney left after the year, in 2005, like, his last call was, the World Series win. Then he left for St. Louis and you realize like, oh man, if Dave Wills could have hung on for, if the White Sox could have held on to him for one more year, and they couldn't have held on to him, if the Rays are offering a job, and, we know guys in the minor league broadcast business, in the pre and post game business, and they're waiting for that opportunity and they can't pick their spots. Like maybe some guy, like a John Rooney, can pick his spots and go home to St. Louis because he's accomplished enough. But like guys looking for that big break, they cannot pass one up. They have to take it. They have to take that major league job. And so, of course you take the Rays job, because you can't, even if there is word that John Rooney might leave or the Cardinals job might open up, you can't count on that being there. You have to take the job in hand. But then when Rooney left, you just realize like, oh man, just one more year, like going from losing John Rooney would have been a blow regardless. But like going from John Rooney and Ed Farmer to Dave Wills and Ed Farmer would have been, maybe a little bit of transition, maybe still feel a bit of a loss when you don't hear like, and that's a White Sox winner, after the game with Rooney. But eventually, like, the way Wills had such a big voice and a big personality and so many connections, especially in Chicago, like you would have felt equally like comfortable. And like, fans of, who were my age when I got to know John Rooney, they would get to know Dave Wills, and like, it would be kind of the same relationship. So yeah, it was just something I thought of often when hearing his voice, like, man, that just, if one, career decision somewhere down the chain prevented that Rays job from getting open, Dave Wills might have been, Chicago's voice rather than Tampa Bay's, and that would have been nice to hear. But yeah, it's a shame. 58 years old, only 58. You had, probably at least, a decade, 2 decades of broadcasting from him. Mm-hmm. He had kind of one of those approaches that could have lasted forever if you wanted to do it. So it is really a loss.
You did get an opportunity to call a couple World Series with the Tampa Bay Rays, and he had to leave the team late in the 2022 season when the team was in Toronto for health reasons, but he was able to rejoin the Rays for the postseason. Again, Dave Wills passes away at the age of 58 years old, a diehard White Sox fan that became the radio voice of the Tampa Bay Rays since the 2005 season. Jim and I will take a quick break, but let's continue our deep dive previews into the position groups preparing for the 2023 season. We'll start with the first base position next on the Sox Machine podcast. Kick off the new year with new gear built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered from the sun to the slopes with premium polarized shades, customable snow glasses, and much more. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that offers a world-class product that's just as good as any expensive pair you've worn. Durable frames and extremely clear optics for outdoor adventures. And that's not all. Shady Rays offers the most insane protection in all of eyewear. Every pair of sunglasses is backed by lost and broken replacements. If you lose or break your pair, even on day one, they told us they will send you a brand new pair, no questions asked. Wear your Shady Rays with confidence because they have your back long after you purchase. With Shady Rays, you can look good and feel good. To date, they have donated over 20 million meals to fight hunger with Feeding America. If you don't love them, exchange them for a new pair or return them for free within 30 days. There's no risk when you shop with Shady Rays. Their team always has your back. I actually have 3 pairs from Shady Rays because they just look awesome, and I'm very picky about my sunglasses. Sometimes I like to match my sunglasses with my outfit. I could be that way. And exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the new year. Go to shadyrays.com and use promo code SOXMACHINE for 50% off 2 pairs of polarized sunglasses. Again, that's shadyrays.com, promo code SOXMACHINE. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 200,000 people. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. And as I mentioned earlier, now is time for us to shift gears and do more of our position previews as we get ready for the 2023 season. We'll be tackling the first and third base positions in the previews here in the podcast. And we're going to start with first base. We had the conversation about the ex-first baseman, Jose Abreu. Let's talk about who is going to be his primary replacement, and that is Andrew Vaughn. And for Andrew Vaughn on Fangraphs, I've noticed that his projections have been updated both in depth charts and zips. And I think for those, especially looking at the counting stats, we'll be happier to see that the depth chart projections have Andrew Vaughn at 26 home runs with 81 RBIs, a slash line at 265, a 331 on base percentage, and slugging 467 with a 2.6 WAR. Zips is higher on Vaughn with 28 homers, 82 RBIs, a 482 slugging percentage, and a 2.8 WAR for the 2023 season. And you mentioned where Jose Abreu was at 15 home runs last year in 2022. It just looked, especially in the counting stats, Jim, that Abreu took a step back from what we have been used to with the 100 RBI plus seasons and hitting 25 to 30 home runs in a season. He just, counting stats wise, he just took a step back. And now here's Andrew Vaughn in his third season in the major leagues. And when he was drafted third overall, we all thought, all right, he is next in line of this lineage at first base. So the main storyline for Vaughn going into this season, Jim, do you think Vaughn is ready to take the torch at first base?
I think ready enough in terms of being the, not only the like a fixture at first base, but like the heart of the lineup. I don't think he's quite that. I think that's more of Eloy Jimenez's role in terms of being that 30 plus homer guy, that 100 plus RBI, the guy that, potential all-star, just guy, you when you see him in the on-deck circle, teams are trying to figure out like, oh God, what do we do? Like, I think he's supposed to be that guy. But when you look at first base overall, like around the league, like one thing that jumped out to me was that Vaughn and Abreu on Fangraphs are projected on their depth charts are projected to have the same weighted on base average, 346 apiece. So they're kind of in the same neighborhood. And that, is another reason why, like, the White Sox had a business decision to make with going from, Abreu to Vaughn, is like their own projections might have said something similar to where like we're paying, why pay $17, $20 million for Abreu services when we have Abreu at home or a new Abreu here, making league minimum for one more year. So there's that, but you look at the rest of the league and it seems like half the league is kind of either improvising at first base or mixing and matching or breaking guys in. Like some guys are interesting, like, Vinny Pasquantino or, Tristan Casas, but like, they aren't fixtures yet. They could, like, Casas could flame out like Bobby Dahlbeck did. Like, there are no great bets down the line. Like Alex Kirilloff looks like he might be getting some reps at first base for the Twins. Like you have Josh Bell and Josh Naylor at first base for the Guardians. Like a lot of positions, or a lot of first base positions are up in the air for a lot of teams. So I think the White Sox are doing well enough at first base to make the decision they did. It's just a matter of like, it's going to take a village, I think, to get this offense back to where it needs to be in order to topple the Guardians.
And I know Andrew Vaughn is trying to say the right things, that his goal is just to be himself. And if he can play his game, that should be good enough. And we speak about the lineage, and we poke holes at the White Sox, and we point out a lot of things over the years that they just can't fix as far as the position. Like right field's been a problem. Second base has been a problem. First base has not been a problem for most of our lifetime, Jim, as White Sox fans. I mean, you go from a Hall of Famer in Frank Thomas, then you go over to Paul Konerko, and then from Konerko, you go to Jose Abreu. I mean, White Sox fans have been kind of spoiled when it comes to first base for the most of it. You have not had to worry about that type of position. And with Vaughn in his first 2 years, we've talked about it a lot, that him playing defense in the outfield out of position has just cratered his overall numbers. And if you want to buy that him playing the outfield has hurt his bat, okay. I don't buy that theory as much, and we'll talk about what I think has been more problematic for Andrew Vaughn. But he's been rushed. He's been thrown into the mix. And here he is in year 3, and he is the starter at first base. And ready or not, you got to take the torch. And if he plays like he has the first 2 years, and if that's Andrew Vaughn, then I'm sorry to be harsh, but Andrew, you are not good enough to take the torch at first base if you're going to be a 17 home run, 70 RBI kind of guy. No, you need a little bit more offensive punch from that particular position, especially with what we've been used to as White Sox fans over the decades. Can Vaughn get to that type of level of performance from Thomas, Konerko, and Abreu? I think so, and we'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, this is a pretty big year for Andrew Vaughn. And again, a big year for the White Sox because after this year, Andrew Vaughn goes into arbitration. So he becomes more expensive year after this 2023 season.
Yeah, it's about going from surviving to thriving, basically, when you look at his season.
Good way to put it.
Dan Szymborski talking about Vaughn and talking about the way he was, rushed to the majors, at 23, like he wasn't rushed in terms of age, but he was rushed in terms of just like the way the point in his career where the pandemic hit and not having any high minors experience and kind of going like, is 15 homers good enough? Is a 50 to 70 to 80 RBI is good enough? Like having that conversation, he brought to mind Ben Grieve and how like Ben Grieve was a guy who was like 20, I think, when he broke in with the A's, won Rookie of the Year, but just never developed like the plate discipline to be anything more than a guy who could crush mistakes. And Dan looked at him and said like, hey, he could have used more. You look at his career, like he could have used a little bit more time tightening up parts of his game. And Vaughn's the same way. I guess the encouraging part is that when you look at what he's done early this spring, it looks like he's worked on, some hand positioning, some stance work, trying to get more lift. Like the line drives have been nice, like lifting the ball, not rolling over so much to the left side has been good. And when you mention the outfield stuff and whether that hurt his value, I don't necessarily think it's outfield as much as it's legs. And whether the legs were the reason or the outfield was the reason why he didn't have legs. Like he was on that, can't run list, or he was on the after 3 games he gets tired. Is that like a case where like he can't play the outfield? Is it a case where he's like playing through something and the White Sox are just another one where they're misreporting it, mishandling it? Like there's so many guys who are like that, and we'll talk about another one later in the show. But I wouldn't necessarily say outfield, but just like general handling could be the reason why like his numbers have been unremarkable and he's been rolling over so much and the power hasn't quite been there, especially like the opposite field power. Combine that with the baseball being deader, going to right field for right-handed hitters, just being a thing that punishes them doubly. And you can just come away unimpressed with his body of work. But if he does, take another off season with new hitting coaches of getting over, kind of the self-imposed rollover problems. And then you get into a program, both physically and just deployment, to where like he has his legs, his base under him more often. Like I can see the season that, was delayed, but ultimately not denied, and that he looks like a number 3 overall pick. Maybe not like an all-star or like a guy who's going to get MVP votes, but given the hit rate of, or I should say miss rate of top 10 picks, like I can see him producing and be like, yeah, he was a fine use of the number 3 pick. Maybe not the best use, but a good enough pick.
You have to run when you put the ball in play and when you're at first base. That's why I'm not buying the outfield is impacting his legs. He's going to have to move playing first base. So hopefully that's still not the case.
Yeah.
One thing that Vaughn has to improve upon in 2022, I'm going to start here because this is what I think is the greatest impact to Andrew Vaughn's numbers. Andrew Vaughn's going to see a lot of right-handed pitching in 2023. The projected starters in the American League, according to Fangraph's depth charts and from Roster Resource, 72% of the starting pitchers in the American League are right-handed. So Vaughn's going to see a lot of right-handed pitching. And in 2022, against sliders, Vaughn saw that pitch more from right-handed pitchers than fastballs. And that is concerning because when you look at the data, you can see in how the league is learning from Andrew Vaughn and what type of book they're starting to establish attacking Andrew Vaughn. And the thing is, in 2022, he hit the slider better than he did in his rookie year. But the problem is that he saw a slider 1/3 of the time against right-handed pitchers. and where he has an average exit velocity of 95 miles per hour against four-seam fastballs, which is awesome. And his whiff rate is below 14%. That's awesome. And he hits 309 against four-seamers, and he slugs 543. All awesome. That is where the damage is coming from Andrew Vaughn. He sees four-seamer, he crushes you. That has not been any different since I was watching him in his junior year at Cal leading up to the Major League Baseball draft. I don't know why anyone throws him a four-seam fastball. That's how he hurts you. But compared to the slider, he whiffs 31% of the time. His batting average against sliders from righties is 188. His slugging percentage is below 300 against right-handers. Only Javier Baez was the worst hitter, according to run value on Baseball Savant, against sliders for right-handed pitchers than Andrew Vaughn. That is not company you want to be in. So you mentioned the hand position change, the stance change, and I noticed the same thing in spring training. And that's what I'm hoping to see early in this upcoming Major League season is how is Andrew Vaughn adjusting against the slider? Because when I broke it down even more in Baseball Savant, pitchers got so confident against Andrew Vaughn, Jim, later in the season that they would spin sliders in the first pitch and the second pitch and the third pitch. Vaughn would not see a four-seam fastball until he was ahead in the count. But if he swung at any of these sliders and he got himself behind the count, they would just slider him to death. And this is the one thing that I think he has to improve upon, because if he can lay off the slider, or if he's more successful against the slider in 2023, we could see a completely different type of season from Andrew Vaughn this year, where he takes that gigantic step forward that all the Andrew Vaughn believers will say, see, I told you he had it in him. But I think it is this particular pitch, because this is one of the biggest pieces of the pie that he's going to see when it comes to pitch distribution thrown at him, especially early in 2023.
Yeah, I knew you were going to cover the Andrew Vaughn slider stuff as well as Andrew Vaughn covers the fastball. So I'm going to steer away from that and say my biggest concern or thing that he has to work on is, can you hazard a guess about what his OPS is in the final month of the season in his career for September, October?
Does it start with the 5?
No.
Oh, it's higher.
No.
Oh, no.
483.
So he's just running out of gas.
Yeah. So like to go back to the leg thing and, you know, just his base, like I want to see a full 6-month season from him. Like, yeah, I could see ebbs and flows and, you know, hot and cold streaks and maybe some weeks where he's not 100%, but I would like to see him be close to 100% by the end of the season and not just look like drained, which he has over the last 2 years, back problems, leg problems, etc. Hopefully, you know, we talked about this with like Carlos Rodon, that it took him a while to figure out a 5-day routine for a 6-month season. And I have the same fears about Andrew Vaughn, the way they brought him up, and he's kind of had to figure that out on the fly. So hopefully this year is the year that he's ready to go the distance, because that last month has just killed him.
They can't have it. The White Sox can't have Andrew Vaughn running out of gas in September, especially if this is going to be a tightly contested race in the American League Central. So that's a good data find, Jim. I did not know that it was that bad at the end of the season for Andrew Vaughn. And yeah, again, it might be part of his player development that he's learning on how to try to play a full regular season in the major leagues and never getting a chance to do that in the minor leagues. So let's go to the over-under here as we wrap up our preview on Andrew Vaughn. And I'm putting the over-under at 80.5 RBIs for Andrew Vaughn in 2023. The projection systems are hovering around the 80.5 RBI mark. This would be a new career high, single season high for Andrew Vaughn if he hit 80 RBIs. Are you taking the over or under 80.5, Jim?
I'm going to say the over, like not by a whole lot. I don't think it was a good number. I had to think a lot about it, but I can see him getting the opportunities and I can see him avoiding strikeouts well enough to get a lot of cheap RBIs the way Jose Abreu did. Like Abreu's skill is not necessarily being the clutchest hitter of all time, but not letting a lot of RBI opportunities go to waste. And I think Vaughn could have the same skills to where, like, you know, it's maybe an unimpressive ground out to second base, but with the runner on third in the third inning where the infield's not playing in, it gets the job done well enough. And, it's another run in the column for him. So I'm going to say over. Like, it feels like 90 is within reach.
The numbers that I keep putting in my head as far as the counting numbers is 20 home runs and 82 RBIs for Andrew Vaughn. So I'm going to take the over on the RBIs. What's going to change my mind completely, especially in the first couple of months, if Andrew Vaughn is finding a lot more success against sliders, especially against right-handed pitching in April and May. Because if he is, and he's doing some damage against that particular pitch, and the adjustments that he's made during spring training carry over to the regular season, and if they are working, then we could see a completely different season where he just crushes all of his projections. And again, he meets the dreams that everybody had, that he is the next 30 home run, 100 RBI first baseman for the Chicago White Sox. But he needs to conquer this particular problem against right-handed pitching with the sliders coming at him to start the 2023 season. But we both have the over for Andrew Vaughn on 80.5 RBIs. Let's talk about his backups. So we'll start with Gavin Sheets first. Depth charts for Fangraphs sees 11 home runs, 36 RBIs from Gavin Sheets, not getting that much playing time, worth half a WAR. Zips, if you give him more than 100 games, Zips is projecting 18 home runs and 63 RBI, so not huge numbers from Gavin Sheets. The main storyline, and this is just fascinating to me, at home, Gavin Sheets is a monster at home. He hits 290 with a 353 on base percentage, and he slugs 610 at Guarantee Rate Field with 22 home runs in 88 games. Away from Guarantee Rate Field, Sheets hits 201 with a 257 on base percentage. He slugs 281, and he only has 4 home runs and 25 RBIs in 90 games. Is this the year Gavin Sheets learns how to hit away from Guarantee Rate Field, Jim?
I think he's the best example the White Sox have, and they don't really have a whole lot of examples of left-handed power, but of the way Guaranteed Rate Field benefits left-handed power between just the relatively cozy dimensions and also the way the ball just seems to carry into the Kraft Cave, into the Miller Lite Landing, around the pole, into section 108. Like, it just, we've seen other teams have those guys that hit those homers, and I think Sheets is the closest thing, because when you look at the way he makes contact, like, the thing that surprised me, he's a big guy. Sometimes his contact looks impressive, but when you look at the StatCast data, he does not hit the ball that hard. Like, when you look at his percentiles, it's 42nd percentile in average exit velocity, 59th percentile for max exit velocity. So even at his best, he's not hitting the ball that hard. And then 27th percentile in hard hit rate. So he doesn't really sting the ball. He just happens to get some good lift on it. His fly ball rate's okay. And he also gets by on beating the shift to the left side with only one infielder there, whether it's, down the line or where the shortstop usually plays. He's been able to fill in his batting average with those kind of singles. But when it comes to hitting the ball hard, he doesn't really do that. And so, at Guaranteed Rate Field, some of his backspin laden fly balls that maybe travel 350 feet, they're good enough. Whereas at Kauffman Stadium, maybe they wouldn't be in other parks like that. So that to me is, part of it's luck, part of it's just distribution. Maybe some, people are better at hitting it at home, or there's a natural tendency to have some home field advantage just because of all the benefits of, playing where you live. But also I think there's an element of just being on that borderline of having enough power. And when you look at it, his stats, 26 homers or so over a full season's worth of plate appearances for his career, those are decent home run numbers. They just happen to be incredibly home loaded to the point where just maybe just this weird line he's riding of just having enough power for certain situations, and the certain situation he most benefits from is the one he sees the most, which is half the season worth of games, and anywhere else he wouldn't be anything remarkable.
22 home runs in 88 games at Guarantee Rate Field, a home run every 4 games you play there. I mean, if he was an everyday starter, okay, that's 20 home runs just at home games. And if you could hit 10 on the road, there you go. That's the other 30 home run guy the White Sox need, but he's so bad on the road. It's just fascinating. So the one thing that Sheets has to improve upon in 2023, mine real quick, he needs to learn how to hit on the road. Okay. I've never heard of a home away platoon type of position sharing here, but it would make sense with Gavin Sheets. He's got to figure out how to hit away from Guaranteed Rate Field if he's going to have any staying power in the major leagues. Is there anything else that you noticed, Jim, that Sheets has to improve upon in 2023?
It goes along the lines of hitting the ball hard, but one of the things I wrote about recently was that Gavin Sheets, one of the things that made him passable as an offensive player, and his RBI percentage is pretty good when it comes to driving and runs and being somebody that played in big situations. He does have the ability to have that inside out swing to where if an infield's presenting him the opportunity to get on base or knock in a cheap run, he can do it. He can, a lot of times he can just bring the hands in, doink it to left field and be fine with an ordinary grounder going through. And with the shift being restricted now and him facing two infielders on the left side most of the time, maybe there'll be some situations where guys will play at the very second base most side of shortstop and run over to the second base position as the pitch is being thrown. So he doesn't actually face a second infielder on the left side as the contact's being made. But if he's getting played relatively straight away, that door might close for him. Which could be fine if he's comfortable pulling the ball on the ground and feeling like there are more hits available to him there. But oftentimes watching him, I had the impression of they allowed him to kick out of the pin. They had him on a 2 count and then they, threw him a slider that kind of spun in the inside half. There's only one infielder on the left side. He could just bring the hands in and kind of get the handle of the barrel, not having the barrel, but the handle of the bat to the ball and just, muscle it through the shortstop position that's vacated and get on base when he should have been out. And if that opportunity is close for him, then, he has to focus more on just ripping the ball to the right side if that's there for him. Can he do that? We haven't really seen that. And part of his profile coming up in the minor leagues was that he was more of a well-rounded hitter, not the classic power threat. And with his lack of speed and first base only profile, how much will that get him? And so now I think it's going to be put under the magnifying glass a little bit with how much power can he tap into now that the cheap single is taken away from him a little bit.
So let's go to the over-under. And the over-under for Gavin Sheets, I have 60.5. And that's the number of games that Gavin Sheets plays in 2023. Jim, I am struggling with trying to identify exactly what Gavin Sheets' role is going to be, at least early, with the 2023 Chicago White Sox. Are you taking the over or under 60.5 games played by Gavin Sheets this season?
I'm taking the over because he didn't say starts.
Right.
I can see bench opportunities, needing some left-handed power, especially, if they bring in a parade of right-handed pitchers to get guys out. And then there's a case where if Oscar Colas isn't ready, if Eloy Jimenez gets hurt again, if Andrew Vaughn gets hurt again, there are a lot of ways for him to get playing time. And one of Sheets' biggest strengths is that he never gets hurt. It was odd seeing him mentioned in, Sports Info Solutions data saying he's the highest injury risk or one of the highest injury risks the White Sox have. And I think it's because he throws his body around right field, just a lot of loud dives that just are bad ideas. And they have thunderous, unsuccessful conclusions. And you realize he should have done that. And he's going to hurt himself. He's American made. He doesn't break down. He's just, you pay for you pay for the quality of an American made product. And that's kind of just he just hits the ground, gets back up, dusts himself off, and he's ready to play again. So it's just, he seems solid. And so if other guys are unavailable, he'll probably be available the way that, Jimenez has not proven he can be, the way Vaughn has wobbled, the way Jake Berger has proven that he can't, he gets banged up in a lot of different ways. Sheets always seems like he's there. And all it takes is one injury or one case of Colas not quite being ready for a prime time yet to where Sheets will get more playing time and maybe more than anybody wants to see.
I'm going to go the over as well, but I have a hard time seeing him playing 100 games in 2023. He might only play half of the games that the White Sox have this year, which is still going to be a nice chunk. But again, when it comes to the projection models, projecting 13 to 18 home runs, I think that would be a nice addition for someone coming off the bench for the Chicago White Sox. Overall team home run total is just, if he could hit like he does at home at Guaranteed Rate Field, just a little bit more on the road, then I don't think we would be talking about Oscar Colas. I think we'd just be sucking it up when it comes to right field, just dealing with Gavin Sheets because he could rake. Hopefully that continues and the White Sox identify that and be like, why is Gavin Sheets starting today? Because he rakes at home. That's why. That's where he hits. We'll bench him when we get back on the road trip, or we can send him down to Charlotte.
Got to take advantage of right field somehow.
Exactly. The other backup for Andrew Vaughn, and I thought he would be more of the primary backup for Yoan Moncada, but I don't think that's the case, and that's Jake Burger. As Jake Burger has been playing a lot of first base in spring training. Fangraphs depth charts doesn't see a lot of playing time in 2023 for Jake Burger. That's why it only projects 5 home runs, 18 RBIs. Zips, if you give Jake Burger 100 starts, is seeing 13 home runs and 48 RBIs. Neither Zips or depth charts on Fangraphs project a more than 1 WAR type of season for Jake Burger. So the main storyline coming into this season, how will the White Sox handle Jake Burger in 2023, Jim?
It seems like we can rule out second base. That is no longer, with the shifts being banned and radical infield alignments being prohibited, like there's no way to hide him there. So that was neat while it lasted. He's playing a lot of first base. Third base, it seems like if he could play there, he would, just because of Yoan Moncada's unreliability, which we'll get to. So, yeah, having seen him at first base, it does seem like he's sliding down the defensive spectrum, and there he is. So there is reason to keep him in the plans just because, you know, as we mentioned, Vaughn, Jimenez, they're Vaughn isn't, I would say, unreliable, but just like you don't never know like how often you're going to be getting his best. With Jimenez, you don't know how many games he's going to play. And so between the two of them, like if one of them's absent, you're going to have to mix and match at first base, at DH, try to take advantage of those matchups and environments, as we mentioned with the Sheets. And so like he's probably the best guy in line to thrive situationally. And so I think that's why they're probably trying to keep him engaged in some way defensively because, third base was really rough and first base seems like it's it. But, you know, we saw a couple pop-ups botched around home plates with him at first base. Wasn't his fault entirely. Like it was miscommunication all over between third base and the pitcher not getting out of the way. Like he was not alone, but having seen him track pop-ups at second base, like he still has work to do there, even at first. Yeah, I was going to ask, what's the one thing that Burger has to improve upon in 2023? We could both agree defense. He's got to get better defensively. Well, I was going to say that, but I would also say like contact. He had the third lowest contact rates among the White Sox last year, with only Seby Zavala and Romy Gonzalez being worse. And Seby Zavala is a backup catcher. Romy Gonzalez was an overmatched rookie who was dealing with tonsillitis and injuries and like shouldn't have gotten like the second base reps he did. So I think Burger, like he's the inverse, I think, of Gavin Sheets. Like Sheets is left-handed, Burger's right-handed. Sheets can track a fly ball enough to play right field way too much. Burger has trouble tracking pop-ups. Sheets has well-rounded hitting abilities, but maybe not enough power. Burger has contact issues, but when he hits the ball, he hits the hell out of it. So I think like they're trying to, you know, if you could combine them, you would have a force. I'm thinking back to we get back to the my favorite combination of players, which would have been Carlos Sanchez. He was Carlos back then, and Micah Johnson. Like, give Micah Johnson, you know, Sanchez's defensive ability. You have a hell of a second baseman. You have like a really dynamic force, but because Johnson just had iron oven mitts at second base on both hands, like he just couldn't get the job done. And I think the same thing here with like Sheets and Burger. Like, if you could just combine them. Give Gavin Sheets the ability to have like that 92nd percentile of, max exit velocity for Burger. Like he can smoke the ball. And if, Sheets had that ability, like you'd have combined the first 2 picks from that draft and you would have just this you would be talking about like a Vlad Guerrero type highlights, maybe not Vlad Guerrero type production, but just like, the StatCast nerds going nuts for something he did. Unfortunately, you can't. So that's why I think you have to be, the White Sox just are trying to make themselves aware of like how they might be able to mix and match if they gets down to the point where Burger has to get some playing time.
So over under 9.5 home runs from Jake Burger in 2023, Jim. Are you taking the over or under?
I'm going to say under just because of the, also the inverse of Sheets. Sheets is always healthy. Burger tends to get hurt. And so I can see playing time, whether it's because he's blocked or because he's just not 100% himself, not being around to get those 10 homers.
I agree. I think playing time is going to be a factor in Jake Burger hitting more than 10 home runs in 2023. Burger turns 27 years old on April 10th. That is his upcoming birthday. So he's entering the prime of his career, and if he's spending the majority of this upcoming season with the Charlotte Knights in AAA being their first baseman, I'm expecting him to put up insane power numbers with the Charlotte Knights this upcoming year. But I think this is going to be a lingering question that White Sox fans have, and what exactly are you doing with Jake Burger moving forward? And I know some White Sox fans wonder if a trade could happen. We talked about that in the last podcast episode, just something to monitor in the upcoming months during the 2023 season, especially if Jake Burger rakes, as we think he will, with the Charlotte Knights this upcoming season. Jim and I will take another quick break for a word from our sponsors, but coming up next, we preview the White Sox third base position group. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. All right, so we previewed first base, which was a lot of conversation about Andrew Vaughn and his potential backups at Gavin Sheets and Jake Burger. Let's move to the hot corner to third base, which this conversation is mostly featured on Yoan Moncada. And Yoan Moncada is Fangraphs depth charts projections for the full season: 18 home runs, 68 RBIs, a 247 batting average, a 326 on base percentage, slugging .408, but a 2.9 WAR value for Moncada thanks to his very good defense. And Zips is projecting similar numbers for a full season: 16 homers, 63 RBIs, 251 batting average, a 329 on base percentage, slugging .413. And Moncada being a 3-WAR player, one of the few 3-WAR players Zips is projecting over the course of the full season for the Chicago White Sox in 2023. The main storyline for Yoan Moncada coming to this year, Jim, is all about him bouncing back from the 2022 season, where he was not very good, especially offensively. And we've been asking what has happened to Yoan Moncada since the 2019 season. Maybe it was the bouncy ball, maybe COVID is still impacting him over the last couple of seasons. And what has shifted for me is not so much can he bounce back. Now it's, can you live up to your contract? Because you're getting $17 million this year, and you're going to make $24 million next year. And there's a $25 million contract option for the 2025 season. It's time for Moncada to live up to the expectations we thought that he was going to be rising up to when he signed this contract extension after the 2019 season. So, Jim, can Yoan Moncada bounce back and start living up to his promise and live up to the contract he signed with the White Sox?
Seems like he's one of Pedro Grifal's priorities because he's important, and maybe not like living up to the contract in terms of being an all-star, getting an MVP vote from James Fegan in a rebuilding year.
Moncada deserved that. I still defend James Fegan about that.
No, I deserve it too. But I just like pointing it out. I just like mentioning James. That's all I'm doing. When it comes to that kind of impact, like I can see him like living up to the contract in a like wins above replacement nerd way. Like, oh, he got 4 wins above replacement. That's worth this money on the open value, like, or on the open market. Like he was, ultimately worth his contract, but it's not quite satisfying. Like it's not the money the White Sox thought they were shoring up. They did not think he was going to be like Connor Gillespie at the glove, which is how we've like likened his offense from 2021. So it will be unsatisfying if he's that kind of 4-win player versus like, I think fans would rather see him be like a 4-win player who's gets 4 wins because he's only around for 120 games, but the 120 games he plays are dynamic. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the Moncadas we're talking about. Is he going to be somebody who has some speed and has some occasional earth-shaking power and plays good defense and just might, come up with the occasional leg or, muscle tweak here and there? Or is it going to be a guy who just kind of survives over the course of the season, like gets by with good defense when nobody else is playing good defense, and never quite looking overmatched against a hitter, but also not looking like he's going to break a game open either. And he bats 6th or 7th, maybe 2nd once in a while if a couple guys are absent, but just isn't really a fixture in the lineup anywhere. And you just more or less shrug at his existence, which I think is kind of where we're at right now with his last 2 years.
Third basemen who have an OPS below 730 do not get paid $20+ million a year. So I 100% agree with you, Jim. If Yoan Moncada has got a 725 OPS, but he's worth 4 WAR because he's a Gold Glove nominee at third base for his excellent defense, and people point to that and say this is why he's getting paid the big bucks. Nope. If that Yoan Moncada was a free agent, he would not be signing for $24 million the following year if he hit that poorly again. And I do say poorly, even though that would be slightly above league average, or is expected to be, depending on what type of baseball is thrown out there in 2023. I'm sorry, but he's got to have, with his skill set and the physical tools and the talent that he has, he should have an OPS in the 800s. Like, this is someone that I was super high with when the White Sox acquired him in the rebuild. He was the star attraction, and we got a taste of that. And, even diving into the data at Baseball Savant and the way that he just demolished fastballs like Andrew Vaughn can demolish fastballs. Like, it just gave you so much hope, being one of the exit velocity leaders in Major League Baseball, that superstardom is coming for Yoan Moncada. And man, since 2020, it's like he hit a brick wall in the major leagues. And I am concerned because if he doesn't bounce back in 2023, I don't know if he will ever bounce back. And boy, you don't want someone that struggles to get a 700 OPS and you're paying them $24 million in the 2024 season. You can't have it. No team could really handle that in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I kind of watching Jonathan Taves recently, or like the last couple seasons, then, he's missing time with long COVID. Like, there is that conversation to have. Like, or not conversation to have necessarily, because it's going to be an uninformed conversation with just how little we know about his condition, and just especially going back to the way the White Sox mismanaged injuries. Like, he talked about coming back from an oblique issue way too soon, and we seem to see that with his bat speed. Like, the bat speed was not there. The bat did not fire through the zone. There was just really nothing on his contact, and he looked lifeless. And he always looks placid, or most of the time he has a placid demeanor. And when just the physical tools are not delivering, it looks lifeless. And, he looks uninterested. And I don't want to say that he is like that. It's a very meatball thing to say, is like, oh, he's mailing it in. I don't think he is, but I think, just the elements are there. Like, even like in his 2019 season, like, he was not like a real charismatic force, and like, Tim Anderson type that just, demanding the cameras on him with the way he just, conducts himself around the field. He's not an electric personality, but the tools are electric. And that's what generates the excitement, is just when he, I like talking about, like, when he pulls the ball with such force in the air that he has to like straighten out his helmet, because like it just, the contact reverberated around the whole stadium like a minor earthquake. And that ability vanished on him. And so whether that's the oblique, or whether that's, a remnant of the COVID issue that we all saw him have in 2020. Like, we saw him running the bases and like just looking completely exhausted, and like that was a very real thing. Now is the performance of last year, that's, I can't say. Like, I can't say either way. Like, I want to be open to it because I think Taves is an example of like somebody who's talking about a little bit, and we've seen him struggle on and off in terms of being somebody to capture his physical game on the ice for stretches of a time. It doesn't help that the Blackhawks have eroded around him. Talent-wise, they're being sold off for parts, but like just his energy and effort and strength have not been there on a reliable basis either. So that's watching the Taves thing unfold recently, during the trade deadline in the AHL, did bring Yoan Moncada to mind a little bit in terms of just like, is he not talking about, can he not talk about it between like just not wanting to and the language barrier of just not being as accessible as other players who might be more candid? Or is it just a case where like, his oblique was messed up the entire year. His mechanics, there caused a cascade issue of just adjusting the mechanics and not being able to get around on, real good velocity, and his season was a mess. So that's why I'm really interested to see what Pedro Grifol has in mind, what Mike Tozar and just, the entire hitting apparatus the White Sox have, Jose Castro and Chris Johnson, what they have in mind to try to get to this. And should he have another injury issue like the oblique, will the White Sox get him off the field and say like, rest up for 15 days. We need you at max capacity. We'll get by with, whoever we have on the bench. Just get better because we need that bat speed back. And we need you to have that power and to have those legs because you're not really anything special without either one.
You mentioned the bat speed. That's the one thing that Yoan Moncada has to improve upon in 2023. And I'm willing to be hurt, Jim. Okay. I'm willing to be hurt again and be incredibly hopeful that Yoan Moncada bounces back, and only for him to rip out my heart and stomp it on the ground if his OPS is in the 600 still when the calendar flips into July. I'm willing to be hurt. But without that bat speed, his numbers last year against velocity greater than 94 miles per hour, we talked about this not that long ago, was well below 400 OPS. OPS below 400 against velocity. So bat speed is incredibly important for Yoan Moncada because unlike Andrew Vaughn, pitchers are not afraid of Yoan Moncada in 2022, and they pounded him with four-seam fastballs, and I'm expecting more of the same. And if Moncada can recapture that bat speed while not being so passive at the plate, but maybe that's why he was so passive at the plate, is because he didn't have the bat speed. But if he could recapture that bat speed, maybe we'll get the bounce back season we've been hoping for and more from Yoan Moncada, and that could really spark some more optimism about the White Sox in 2023. If he doesn't have that bat speed, Jim, man, I don't know what the White Sox do. I guess you just trudge along and knowing that you're paying Yoan Moncada $24 million the following year and planning to buy him out for $5 million after the 2024 season. And that would just be such a bummer way to talk about Yoan Moncada's career with the White Sox. Like, this is a pretty big year for Yoan Moncada. It's a critical year for him personally.
I guess slightly reassuring about Moncada is that he's easy to watch as an amateur scout. Like, if he's got it, he's got it. If he doesn't have it, he doesn't have it. And like, when you talk about, go back to Pedro Grifol talking about like the White Sox energy level, he might be a case, and maybe not, maybe he was mailing it in, but also like, even if he isn't mailing in, or just like, it's his effort level isn't a matter of caring. It just might be like, I can't summon the effort. And so like, my best is just not good enough right now, but I'm out here anyway because I can play okay defense. Like, that's kind of how I'm thinking of it. Like, it's not necessarily to disparage his character, because that's, I think if you're talking about mailing it in, it's a character flaw. I'm talking more along the lines of just like, does he have it? And fortunately, like, watching him, like, you can tell. And hopefully, if we can tell, they can tell. And if the White Sox are better at handling injuries and physical conditioning and just being aware of how physical conditions are really affecting the product, the way that they did not know it with Moncada, with Larry Garcia, with Luis Robert, letting go with the bat with the wrong hand. Like, there are so many cases of the White Sox mishandling injuries in ways that were so plainly visible to people who don't really know anything about swing mechanics or, 40, or I shouldn't say 40, like 60 times down the line. Like, you could see it. And with Moncada, like, you can see it. So that's kind of nice.
So let's go to the over-under, and I have slated at 3 WAR. So kind of the same conversation we had about Andrew Benintendi, with his massive deal. Can Benintendi get over under 3 WAR? I'm putting that same number on Yoan Moncada. Do you have over or under 3 WAR for Yoan Moncada in the upcoming season?
I have over just because of the defense. I think it's going to be, you go back to the question about like production. The question is going to be whether it's a fun version of like 3 wins, because like he was a 4 WAR player in 2021 and we saw penals going to the mat about Yoan Moncada's value on Twitter because like he was valuable. Like he served a purpose, but it wasn't fun. Like it was useful, not fun. And so that to me, that's, the question is not, I mean, it's obviously a question if he gets to get to 3 wins above replacement because he didn't do it last year. And it could be a case where like his body doesn't hold up. But I think if he does clear that number, the question is, was it fun? Or was it just like a workman-like 3.5 is the bigger question to me. So I'm going to say over.
Yoan Moncada is the one of the few players the White Sox have that if he plays 140 plus games and if he bounces back offensively, 3 WAR is way short on Yoan Moncada. Like we're talking 5+ WAR type of player that Yoan Moncada could be. So I think for me, when I'm looking at this over under, it's how many games is Yoan Moncada playing? Because if he plays 140 games, because of his defense, he should get to 3+ WAR for the season, even if his OPS is 725 and most of that OPS is his on-base percentage as he draws more walks. I'm going to say over, and I'm open myself again to be heartbroken about Yoan Moncada if he does not perform well. If it's under, it's because the bat speed doesn't return. And the bat speed doesn't return for XYZ reasons, maybe all of them due to some type of various health issues that he's going through, but it doesn't prevent him from manning third base for the Chicago White Sox. But he is one of these players on the team, one of the few players that they have that could have a 5+ WAR season for the Chicago White Sox. He just needs to hit in order to do it. And if he can have his OPS at 800 or above again, and if he's someone that can, hit 20, 25 home runs for the White Sox, shoot, he could maybe be in talks of like all-star conversations or maybe receive another 10th place MVP vote.
This would be 9th. James will give him 9th. No, I think you have to be open to having your heart broken by Moncada just because of that upside and like all the things he theoretically could give the White Sox that they don't have. Defense, left-handed bats, speed, even if it doesn't show up in stolen bases. And, if he's healthy, it might show up in more stolen bases because of the new rules. But even if not stolen bases, base running ability, the ability to go from first to third and from second to home and from first to home, like he has that. So like the unique package of skills gives the White Sox lineup I think he's their biggest injection of upside if they have one. Like they don't know if they're going to get it, but we know what Jimenez can do and we hope that he hits 30 homers and drives in 100 and with all the numbers that go along with it. But we know his defense isn't going to be good. We know that he's going to be a righty when they could use another lefty. And so he's got a certain ceiling to his overall value. With Moncada, his ceiling of overall value is really, really high, especially relative to the rest of the roster. It's just the, high risk, high reward. And the risk is just the risk is that, as you mentioned, getting paid $17 million, getting paid $24 million for a guy who is kind of Todd Frazier. Defense and the occasional, the lopsided offense. Like in Frazier's case, he could hit 40 homers, but it was the saddest 40 homers. I shouldn't say saddest because Adam Dunn did it too, but just 40 homers, but also a lot of pop-ups that just killed you. I think Moncada the same way. He'll play good defense and provide some on-base value, but otherwise, nothing's really there. And Todd Frazier gets $10 million for a 1-year contract on the market from a team that really needs something. And Moncada's getting 17 and 24 and for a team that's at the top of its alleged payroll limit. So that's the discussion we're having here.
So looking at the backup options at third base for the Chicago White Sox, it's a random collection of players. It looks like on paper, nobody clear cut, but you got Hanser Alberto, who's been getting some run in spring training for the White Sox, Romy Gonzalez, Lurie Garcia, maybe Jake Berger, but I'm not so confident in his ability playing third base in the major leagues again for the White Sox, and Lenyn Sosa. Out of those options, Jim, if Yoan Moncada were to get hurt and punch a hole through a wooden object, that does not happen during spring training. But if Moncada's not available, who do you like out of that collection, or maybe someone else that I haven't mentioned, to be the immediate backup for Yoan Moncada at third base?
I think, now that Elvis Andrus is playing second base, and you hope that Anderson's able to play more than 2/3 of the season and not leave so many starts available at shortstop. But if the two of them can lock down the middle infield, I think that, the hopes that we had for Lenyn Sosa getting a little bit more time to shore up his game and build on the incredible gains he made last year, I'm hoping that would pay off with some moments at third base. Maybe not like, an above average third baseman, but somebody who, keeps the project afloat. Romy Gonzalez also, I think, like, if he's truly having the offseason and the work and the progress that the White Sox have said he's made, and it's not just that he lives in Miami and he lives so close to all the White Sox hitting coaches, and they've just seen so much of him and seen his desire that they want him to do well. And they're speaking more from their hearts than their heads. Probably back up at third base, maybe the most value he can provide on the field. Just being, because he has like the skills, like he has the arm, he has the, he can cover shortstop, so he can play third. Like he should be able to hold down a job there. So I think between the two of them, I think I like it the most. I just don't want to see either of them until like June. So you hope that Moncada, should he have to miss some time, he buys them some time to finish up their developments, or allow Sosa to get a couple hundred at bats at Charlotte to finish what he's doing, and force him to force the issue, or Gonzalez, if he's going to be on the bench, like proving the White Sox correct for having the faith in him before he's needed to hold down what turns out to be a key offensive position, because third base is pretty talented.
Well, that will do it for that position preview for the first base and third base for the Chicago White Sox. Thank you guys for listening to us as we take a deep dive. The next position preview that we'll have next week is the middle infield for the Chicago White Sox, taking a look at second base and shortstop. So a much longer conversation about Tim Anderson, a longer conversation about Elvis Andrus, and of course all of the backup options that the White Sox have in the middle infield. So that's something to look forward to in an upcoming episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you just discovered the Sox Machine Podcast, you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. We also upload our podcasts into our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine, which you can subscribe there for all the videos that we post. And also now shorts. If you haven't noticed, we're starting to go into the shorts business, doing some YouTube reels, some Instagram reels, playing along with
Video shorts, not actual shorts.
It's not shorts weather yet. I mean, it might be 60 degrees in Chicago on Monday, but it might be 35 degrees later in the week. So it's not quite shorts weather yet, but we're doing some short videos on YouTube and Instagram. And you can also follow us on Instagram. We are at Sox Machine. If you enjoy our work and want more, you can get more by signing up at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content. They get ad-free versions of both the podcast and website. And when we have new Sox Machine swag in the Sox Machine store, they're the first ones to receive it. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball, and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.